to that place in us where we're not censoring ourselves or trying to do it good or right, but rather connect to whatever it is we're trying to say.
In the shimmering mirage of Hollywood, where fame flickers as fast as camera flashes, few names cut through the illusion like Al Pacino. He isn't just an actor, he's a force of nature, a living embodiment of raw, unfiltered human truth. For over 5 decades, Pacino has stood as both prophet and rebel of the craft, reshaping the meaning of screen acting through performances that burn their way into film history. From the haunting quiet of The Godfather, to the operatic rage of Scarface, and the volcanic duality of Heat, Pacino has never acted. He has lived. Each role feels less like performance and more like possession, as if the soul of the character simply borrowed his body for a while. NBUT behind that brilliance lies a man consumed, obsessed with the idea that truth on screen is sacred. To Pacino, acting has never been a profession. It is a spiritual calling. His philosophy is stripped to the bone, authenticity above all. He once said that acting is fighting against artificial behavior until something real emerges. Those words weren't just poetic musings. They were his battle cry. In a town of artifice, Pacino demanded honesty. And that demand would come to define not only his greatness, but also his greatest conflicts. Hollywood adored him, but it also feared him. Directors called him intense. Co-stars called him unpredictable. He could be tender one moment and thunderous the next, like a preacher whose sermon turns into confession. But the real tension lay deeper. Pacino didn't just want others to act with him. He wanted them to believe with him. When he stepped onto a set, he wasn't there to rehearse a scene. He was there to live a moment of truth, no matter how messy, uncomfortable, or vulnerable it became. That devotion made him magnetic. It also made collaboration with him feel like walking a tightrope without a net. You see, Al Pacino's artistry wasn't born in luxury or lineage. It rose from struggle, the restless hunger of a kid from the Bronx, raised by a single mother who worked long hours just to keep the lights on. The stage became his salvation. In those early years at the Actors Studio, he absorbed everything under the mentorship of Lee Strasberg, yet he refused to become a carbon copy of any method. What emerged was something uniquely Pacino, part street poet, part mystic, part madman, an actor who believed that truth could only come when you stripped yourself bare, without vanity, without control. By the time The Godfather made him a global phenomenon, Pacino was already quietly rebelling against the Hollywood machinery. Fame didn't seduce him, it unnerved him. While others chased red carpets, he chased emotional honesty. His performances were never about looking good or hitting marks. They were about revealing something human, even if that truth was ugly. When he played Michael Corleone, he wasn't crafting a mobster. He was exploring a man's slow corrosion of soul, turning innocence into ice. That's why audiences didn't just watch him, they felt him. Yet, the deeper his art grew, the narrower his tolerance became for anything that smelled of pretense. To Pacino, acting had to be a sacred exchange. Spontaneous, alive, unpredictable. He once compared it to jazz. You find the truth in the note you didn't plan to play. But in the evolving industry around him, acting was becoming increasingly intellectualized. By the 1990s and beyond, Hollywood's new generation of performers leaned heavily on research, psychology, and carefully designed technique. To Pacino, it was like watching someone try to bottle lightning, and so began a silent war, not of egos but of philosophies. Pacino versus the modern method. The believer versus the technician. His collaborations with other greats often ignited something electric, but with certain actors, the energy turned volatile. The problem wasn't talent. Every one of them was gifted, even brilliant. The problem was how they approached truth. For Pacino, emotion had to come from the gut. For others, it could be built like an architect drawing blueprints. That difference, raw instinct versus controlled design, would spark some of the most fascinating creative tensions Hollywood had ever seen. But before the clashes, before the whispered stories of friction on set, there was the artist, vulnerable, searching, haunted by the need to connect. In interviews, Pacino often confessed that he never felt he truly knew how to act. Every film was a new test, every role a descent into chaos, until something real appeared. That humility, the refusal to become comfortable, was both his curse and his gift. It's why directors called him fearless, why co-stars described him as possessed, and why audiences could never look away. And yet, for all his reverence of truth, Pacino was not without contradictions. He could be gentle off-camera, even shy, but the moment the director called action, he became unpredictable, uncontainable. His colleagues described it as standing next to a live wire, thrilling, dangerous, and unforgettable. Some actors could meet that energy and rise with him. Others faltered. Because when Pacino looked at you in a scene, he wasn't seeing a colleague reading lines. He was searching your soul, demanding that you abandon all safety nets and meet him in that sacred space of emotional risk. That's the secret behind his legend. The reason his scenes never feel rehearsed, never feel safe. Pacino doesn't chase perfection. He chases truth, even if it burns. But for those unprepared for that fire, collaboration could quickly become confrontation. And as Hollywood evolved, as younger generations embraced method, immersion, research, and technique, Pacino's instinctive purity began to feel almost rebellious. This is where the story truly begins, not with the awards, not with the applause, but with the collisions. The moments when Al Pacino, the man who worshipped emotional honesty, came face to face with actors who believed that mastery came from control. Each encounter became a philosophical showdown, exposing what Hollywood rarely admits, that behind the glamour lies an invisible battlefield between feeling and fabrication. Because to understand Pacino's legacy, you must first understand this truth. He never set out to be admired. He set out to connect, and for that connection, he was willing to sacrifice comfort, reputation, even relationships. To him, art was worth the cost. In the chapters that follow, we'll step into those collisions. 6 encounters that shook sets, divided opinions, and revealed the fragile line between genius and madness. Johnny Depp, Leonardo DiCaprio, Tom Cruise, Kevin Spacey, Dustin Hoffman, Jared Leto, each would meet Pacino's truth head-on, and each, in their own way, would leave with a scar. Because when Al Pacino looks into a camera, he isn't pretending to be someone else. He's reminding you, and every actor who dares to stand beside him, that art without risk isn't art at all. It's only imitation. And for a man like Pacino, imitation was never enough. By the mid-1990s, Al Pacino was already a myth in motion, a walking masterclass in emotional truth, the kind of actor who could make silence roar louder than dialogue. But on the set of Donnie Brasco in 1997, Pacino encountered something that would test his patience, his artistry, and his belief in what acting truly meant. Johnny Depp, NDEPP, was Hollywood's enigmatic chameleon, a man known for his eccentric transformations, vanishing so deeply into characters that even his co-stars sometimes couldn't find him. For Pacino, who believed in the simplicity of emotional honesty, Depp's elaborate methods seemed like layers of armor, an unnecessary distance between actor and truth. From the very first rehearsals, Pacino sensed the divide. NHE watched Depp methodically build his character, the undercover agent Joe Pistone, from the outside in. Depp obsessed over voice modulation, hand movements, the way Pistone chewed gum or tapped his fingers. He would spend hours studying FBI tapes, dissecting real-life behavior, as if character could be assembled like furniture from fragments of research. Pacino, on the other hand, arrived on set with minimal preparation, not out of laziness, but because he trusted emotion over intellect. His character, Lefty Ruggiero, wasn't something he constructed, it was something he allowed to take over him. For Pacino, the moment the camera rolled was sacred. That's when truth happened, raw and unpredictable. Tension began subtly. During early takes, Depp would sometimes stop mid-scene, fine-tuning his gestures or recalibrating his tone. Pacino would stare, eyes narrowing, sensing the energy slipping away. He believed that the scene's emotional current should carry everything. Not calculation, not control. To Pacino, every moment Depp adjusted himself was like cutting the veins of spontaneity. One day, during a pivotal emotional exchange, Pacino's frustration boiled over. The two were deep in a confrontation, the kind that bleeds authenticity. But something about Depp's energy felt absent, mechanical. Pacino abruptly stopped the scene and looked at him, not as Lefty, but as Al Pacino. "The master. Where are you right now?" he asked quietly. "Because you're not here with me." NTHE words hung in the air like a sermon. The crew froze. Depp was startled. For Pacino, it wasn't an insult. It was an invitation. He was pleading for presence, for truth. But Depp, deeply rooted in his external preparation, took it differently, as a critique of his method. NTHE tension between them never truly dissolved. Off camera, they remained polite, even respectful. But their process was oil and water. Pacino's art came from instinct. Depp's came from architecture. When Pacino spoke about acting, he used spiritual terms: surrender, trust, living. Depp, meanwhile, used the language of design, character work, structure, detail. Despite the friction, the camera captured something electric. Their opposing energies ignited a chemistry that defined Donnie Brasco. Pacino's fragility as Lefty, a weary gangster whose soul was eroding, found a strange counterbalance in Depp's controlled, undercover tension. The audience felt two truths colliding, one born of raw instinct, the other of crafted precision. And Pacino would later say in an interview, half amused, half weary, "Johnny's a fine actor, very talented. But me, I like when it's messy. Life's messy. Acting should be too." It was his way of admitting that artistry has many paths. But he would never stray from his own. Behind closed doors, Pacino reflected deeply on what had happened during Donnie Brasco. For the first time in years, he saw the new generation of actors embracing methodical technique over emotional risk. To him, this shift represented something dangerous: a loss of the soul in performance. NHE often described acting as a kind of faith. You step into a scene not knowing what will happen, trusting that emotion will guide you. "If you know too much," he once said, "you stop listening." And listening, to him, was everything. Time Pacino's disciples from the old school understood this: Marlon Brando, James Dean, and later, Robert De Niro during his early days. They believed in instinct, in allowing the subconscious to steer the ship. But as Hollywood evolved, the new wave of actors began to approach the craft like science: precise, calculated, often rehearsed to death. Pacino, though, belonged to the opposite camp. He saw emotion as a storm that had to be felt, not studied. For him, the actor's body was an instrument of chaos. The goal wasn't to control it, but to let it sing its imperfect song. Watching Depp meticulously rehearse was, to Pacino, like watching a musician tune endlessly but never play the melody. And ironically, that very friction between their methods gave Donnie Brasco its haunting authenticity. Pacino's vulnerability made Lefty heartbreakingly real. Depp's control made Pistone convincingly restrained. Their scenes crackled because they mirrored the reality of their off-screen dynamic: Pacino reaching out for connection, Depp holding something back. When Donnie Brasco finally premiered, critics praised their chemistry, unaware of the quiet war beneath the surface. The film became a masterclass in duality: emotion versus restraint, instinct versus intellect. Yet for Pacino, the experience left a lingering sadness. He had glimpsed what Hollywood was becoming, a place where truth was increasingly rehearsed, not lived. Years later, when asked about Depp, Pacino spoke with characteristic grace. "Johnny's got a beautiful imagination," he said. "He builds. Me, I try to break." That one sentence captured the essence of their divide. Depp built characters from the outside in. Pacino stripped away everything until only truth remained. In hindsight, Donnie Brasco was more than just a film. It was a symbolic passing of the torch between two acting eras. The 1970s had belonged to the emotional revolutionaries: Brando, Pacino, De Niro, men who let madness and beauty spill unfiltered onto the screen. The 1990s ushered in a generation of technicians, actors who refined chaos into form, who researched, planned, perfected. And Pacino, standing between those worlds, refused to evolve in the conventional sense. He didn't want evolution. He wanted preservation, of authenticity, of instinct, of soul. To him, Acting wasn't about precision. It was about being alive, even when the moment demanded imperfection. And so, Donnie Brasco became not only a critical success, but a quiet battlefield. A film where two geniuses met and wrestled over what truth meant in art. For Depp, truth was something to construct carefully. For Pacino, it was something you fell into without a map. After filming ended, Depp reportedly told a friend, "Pacino's dangerous because he feels everything." And that was the heart of it. Pacino's danger wasn't his fame or power. It was his refusal to fake. He demanded that every emotion, every silence, be real. NFOR Al Pacino, the war between emotion and technique, wasn't just artistic, it was existential. It was a question that defined his entire life. Do you act or do you live? And in Donnie Brasco, amidst tension and brilliance, he proved once again that for him, the only acting worth doing was the kind that bled truth. By 2019, Al Pacino was no longer just a legend. He was a monument. Every glance, pause, or whisper he gave on screen carried decades of cinematic gravity. Yet even at this stage of his life, Hollywood had new disciples with new doctrines. Among them was Leonardo DiCaprio, a perfectionist whose craft was defined by endless research, character maps, and obsessive emotional calibration. When the two men met on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it wasn't a battle of ego, but of philosophy, instinct versus architecture, intuition versus control. DiCaprio was known for his preparation, bordering on ritual. Before shooting, he'd immerse himself in every detail, studying real actors from the 1960s, analyzing scripts like scientific data, even practicing lines until they felt carved in stone. For him, control was confidence, knowing everything meant being ready for anything. And Pacino, however, walked in with nothing but trust in the moment. His process was like jazz, spontaneous, dangerous, alive. He didn't rehearse until the truth was gone. He wanted to discover the scene, not replicate it. And that, to him, was the difference between performance and life. During early table reads, Pacino's casual fluidity puzzled DiCaprio. Pacino would drift in and out of lines, changing rhythms, throwing in subtle improvisations. DiCaprio, precise and deliberate, sometimes struggled to follow. To him, acting was about delivering the crafted truth. To Pacino, truth could never be crafted. It could only be caught. Their interactions were polite but laced with creative friction. In one rehearsal, DiCaprio meticulously discussed his character's backstory, motivations, and gestures. Pacino listened patiently, then smiled and said, "The research department is down the hall. We're in the acting department here." Everyone laughed, but the remark carried an edge. It was Pacino's gentle way of saying, "Stop thinking. Start feeling." NFOR Pacino. Too much preparation could kill the magic. He once said, "The more you know, the less you believe." It was his creed. When he looked at DiCaprio, he saw brilliance wrapped in armor. Talent so guarded by intellect that it risks suffocating the spontaneous flame that makes art feel alive. Yet despite their differences, the two created something beautiful. In their scenes together, Pacino's unpredictability forced DiCaprio to loosen up, to react rather than plan. DiCaprio, in turn, grounded Pacino's energy, giving it structure and clarity. It was an unspoken duel between chaos and control, and the result was mesmerizing. Behind the camera, Pacino later joked about DiCaprio's meticulousness. "He's a fine actor," he said, "but I don't need a compass to find the truth." It wasn't arrogance, it was conviction. To Pacino, the scene didn't live on paper. It lived in the invisible electricity between two people when the camera rolled. In interviews, DiCaprio described Pacino as an artist from another time. And in many ways, he was right. Pacino represented the dying breed of emotional gamblers, actors who thrived on risk, who didn't need safety nets of research or control. He trusted the chaos, because for him, that's where life happened. Their brief collaboration became a symbolic handshake between generations. DiCaprio's precision and Pacino's passion fused for a moment, revealing two sides of the same truth, that art is both discipline and surrender. But make no mistake, if you asked Pacino which mattered more, he'd tell you without hesitation, surrender, every time. Long before Collateral became the sleek, neo-noir thriller starring Tom Cruise and Jamie Foxx, it was supposed to be something entirely different. A film that would reunite two titans of opposing craft, Al Pacino and Tom Cruise. The plan was simple but combustible. Pacino as the weary cab driver, Cruise as the cold-blooded assassin. On paper, it was genius. In reality, it was a storm waiting to happen. NTHE first meeting between Pacino and Cruise was electric, not because of warmth, but because of the tension that vibrated beneath every word. Cruise, ever the engineer of performance, arrived armed with research files, psychological breakdowns, and meticulously color-coded notes. His process was surgical, rooted in control. Every breath, every eye flicker, every movement was calculated for maximum impact. And Pacino, by contrast, entered the room like a man trusting fate. No notebook. No script pages annotated to death. Just instinct, silence, and a readiness to feel instead of plan. He didn't want to control the character. He wanted to surrender to him. "You find the truth when you stop looking for it," Pacino once said, and that belief was at the core of everything he did. During pre-production rehearsals, this philosophical clash began to show. Cruise asked detailed questions about motivation and structure, where his hitman's psychological breaking point was, how his gesture should reflect detachment. Pacino listened for a while before cutting in softly. "Maybe stop trying to find him. Let him find you." Cruise smiled politely, but Pacino could sense it, the subtle tightening, the internal resistance. For Cruise, precision was the truth. He came from the school that believed control equaled excellence. Pacino, meanwhile, viewed over-preparation as the death of authenticity. "Some actors design beautiful houses," he said later, "but I prefer the ones who live in them, even if the furniture gets broken sometimes." NTHE creative divide widened. Pacino would improvise during test readings, shifting lines, inserting emotional nuances that weren't in the script. Cruise would freeze, caught off guard, unsure how to respond to something unplanned. Pacino, however, thrived on that discomfort. It was the moment when acting stopped being safe and started being real. Director Michael Mann, known for his precision and control, sided more naturally with Cruise's meticulousness. Mann's vision of Collateral required technical discipline, tightly choreographed lighting, exact timing, rehearsed tension. Pacino's instinctive chaos didn't fit that machinery. Gradually, whispers began that maybe this combination, two alpha energies pulling in opposite directions, couldn't coexist on screen. And so, quietly, Pacino stepped away. No feud, no public fallout. Just an unspoken acknowledgement that their worlds didn't align. Jamie Foxx was brought in, and the film went on to become a critical success. But behind the scenes, Pacino's ghost lingered. The question of what Collateral might have been if instinct had met precision in equal measure. Pacino later reflected on the experience with a wry smile. "It wasn't my movie," he said. "Sometimes you feel the energy isn't yours to live in, and that's okay." But beneath the calm words lay something deeper, an understanding that Hollywood was changing. The age of raw emotional chaos was giving way to one of carefully engineered performances. In Cruise, Pacino saw a mirror image, not of himself, but of what he refused to become. Cruise's dedication was flawless, his discipline unmatched. But to Pacino, perfection was the enemy of feeling. "You can't calculate lightning," he once said. "You just have to be there when it strikes." And that was the essence of it. Pacino didn't want to act like he was in danger. He wanted to be in danger. He didn't want to craft emotion. He wanted to live it, breathe it, bleed it. The difference was seismic. Hollywood, though, was moving toward precision. Actors who measured every pause, every tear, every heartbeat. Pacino belonged to another generation, one that chased the unpredictable. He didn't want to control his art. He wanted to get lost in it, even if it meant chaos. NTHE lost version of Collateral stands today as one of those tantalizing Hollywood what-ifs. A collision that never happened, a masterpiece that might have been. But perhaps, for Pacino, the decision to walk away wasn't loss. It was preservation. He wasn't made for precision. He was made for fire. And that's the irony. The film's title itself, Collateral, spoke to Pacino's world. Every artist pays a price. And for Pacino, the price of staying true to instinct was walking away from anything that asked him to fake it, even if it meant leaving behind another potential classic. By the early 1990s, Al Pacino stood on sacred cinematic ground. After The Godfather, Scarface, and Serpico, he was no longer just an actor. He was the embodiment of emotional truth. Every word he spoke on screen carried a kind of volcanic authenticity, as if his soul itself had been cracked open. But even at the height of his legend, the universe seemed determined to test his convictions about what real acting truly meant. One of those tests came wrapped in a script called Glengarry Glen Ross, David Mamet's razor-edged play turned film, a brutal exploration of men devoured by ambition. It was the kind of story Pacino loved, raw, human, stripped of illusion. But what he didn't expect was that the film's ensemble would pit him against one of the most precise, controlled actors in the business, Kevin Spacey. From the very first table read, Pacino sensed the difference. He approached each scene like a boxer, light on his feet, unpredictable, always ready to explode. Spacey, on the other hand, arrived armed with technical mastery. Every pause, every inflection, every flicker of his eyes seemed meticulously calibrated. Where Pacino lived his lines, Spacey performed them. NTHE tension was almost chemical. During rehearsal, Pacino would shift tone, experiment, let emotion dictate the rhythm. Spacey, sticking to the blueprint, sometimes cut him off unintentionally, trying to preserve timing. Pacino could feel it, the rhythm breaking, the life draining from the moment. To him, acting was a conversation between souls, not a chess game of precision. In one particularly heated exchange during filming, Pacino finally snapped. Spacey had delivered a take that was technically flawless, sharp, articulate, perfectly measured. But it fell hollow to Pacino, devoid of blood and breath. He turned to Spacey between takes and said quietly but firmly, "You're demonstrating. Don't demonstrate acting. Do it." And everyone on set froze. Spacey, taken aback, didn't respond. But Pacino's words weren't meant as cruelty. They were a plea for truth. For him, emotion wasn't a tool. It was the destination. The moment you tried to show the audience something, you'd already lost the soul of it. Director James Foley later admitted that the contrast between the two men created an invisible electricity on set. "You could feel the air change," he said. Al was chaos. Beautiful, terrifying chaos. Kevin was control, precise and intellectual. Watching them together was like watching a storm collide with a mirror. NTHE final result was cinematic dynamite. Pacino's Ricky Roma was seductive, fiery, alive, a man who felt every word he said. Spacey's John Williamson, cold and calculating, became the perfect counterpoint. The tension between their acting philosophies bled through the screen, turning what might have been a simple dialogue scene into a battle of artistic ideologies. NBUT, that battle didn't end there. A few years later, Pacino found himself in another creative clash, this time with his old friend Dustin Hoffman. The two had been circling a project with director Sidney Lumet, an ambitious film about the Attica prison riots. On paper, it was a dream collaboration, 3 legends, 1 explosive story. But as pre-production began, Pacino realized that his and Hoffman's approaches were galaxies apart, and Hoffman was the archetype of the intellectual actor. He dissected scripts like an academic, filling notebooks with psychological theories, historical research, and behavioral studies. He wanted to understand every fragment before stepping on set. Pacino admired him deeply, but also felt suffocated by that level of analysis. "Dustin builds the violin," Pacino once said. "But sometimes, you gotta stop building and play the damn music." NTHAT line summed up everything. For Pacino, acting wasn't about constructing an idea of truth. It was about being it. Hoffman's endless preparation, though brilliant, left no oxygen in the room for spontaneity. During rehearsals, Pacino would throw himself into the moment, responding instinctively, while Hoffman would pause, analyze, adjust. The rhythm, that sacred flow Pacino lived for, kept breaking. Sidney Lumet, a director who adored both men, tried to mediate. But even he saw that the two were speaking different artistic languages. Hoffman sought precision. Pacino sought danger. Hoffman believed in architecture. Pacino believed in fire. Eventually, the project dissolved under the weight of its own genius. Pacino never spoke bitterly of it, but his reflections years later revealed the philosophical heartbreak beneath. "Some actors search forever," he said. "They study, they build, they think. Me, I jump. I'd rather drown in the truth than swim in the theory." That, in essence, was Pacino's war, not with other actors, but with the creeping dominance of technique over instinct. Hollywood by then had begun to idolize perfection, seamless takes, flawless accents, immaculate preparation. But Pacino saw beauty in imperfection, in moments that cracked open by accident and revealed something brutally human. NHI's clashes with Spacey and Hoffman weren't personal. They were spiritual. They represented two conflicting paths to art, one paved with intellect, the other with surrender. Pacino's method was dangerous, unpredictable, even exhausting, but it breathed life. It made audiences feel something primal, something that no amount of research could replicate. In the years that followed, Pacino's quote about Hoffman would become legendary in acting circles: "Stop building the violin and play the damn music." It was more than advice. It was a manifesto, a declaration that art wasn't about control. It was about courage. The courage to show up unguarded, unplanned, and let the moment break you open. In Glengarry Glen Ross, that courage made him unforgettable. In his near collaboration with Hoffman, it made him uncompromising. And in every clash, Pacino remained the same. A man who believed that truth doesn't need to be constructed. It just needs to be felt. NFOR him. Acting wasn't about mastery. It was about surrendering to something greater than the self, that invisible current where life and art become indistinguishable. And though it often led him into conflict with Hollywood's most celebrated minds, Pacino never apologized for it. Because in the end, he wasn't fighting people. He was fighting for the soul of acting itself. By the time House of Gucci began filming in 2021, Al Pacino had seen everything Hollywood could offer: the glory, the madness, the method. He had stood alongside legends, defied directors, and outlasted trends. Yet somehow, even after 5 decades of redefining what it meant to be real on screen, the universe wasn't done testing him. Because on that Italian set, he would meet a new kind of performer: Jared Leto, a man whose obsession with transformation bordered on the surreal. From the moment Pacino met Leto, he recognized the signs, the same signs he'd seen in Depp, in Hoffman, in 100 others who confused performance with possession. But Leto was different. He wasn't just acting, he was becoming someone else entirely. He arrived to set not as Jared, but as Paolo Gucci, complete with prosthetics, exaggerated accent, and a relentless commitment to staying in character, no matter who or what was around him. And at first, Pacino admired the effort. He respected any actor willing to bleed for their art. But as the days turned into weeks, the cracks began to show. During one take, Leto insisted on improvising entire speeches in character, wandering off script, speaking Italian gibberish, dramatically sobbing into Pacino's chest. The crew laughed nervously, unsure if they were witnessing genius or chaos. Pacino, ever the master of instinct, stood still, eyes narrowing slightly. He let the scene play, but afterward, as the director called cut, he turned to an assistant and murmured, "Tell the kid the scene's over. He can come back now." It was dry, cutting, but filled with weary affection, because for Pacino, this wasn't anger. It was recognition. He'd seen what happens when art becomes obsession. NW here, Pacino chased truth through emotion. Leto hunted it through transformation. To him, the deeper he disappeared into character, the more authentic it became. But to Pacino, the opposite was true. "The moment you lose yourself," he once said, "you lose the truth." Acting, for him, was never about hiding behind someone else. It was about finding yourself inside them. Their dynamic on set became both fascinating and frustrating. Leto would stay in character between takes, addressing Pacino as Papa, and speaking with Paolo's thick Italian accent even during lunch breaks. Pacino, meanwhile, would quietly retreat, sipping espresso, half amused and half exhausted by the endless theater of it all. One afternoon, during a particularly emotional scene, Pacino tried to reach Leto with genuine feeling, a spontaneous, heart-wrenching plea delivered with pure instinct. But Leto, buried under layers of prosthetic and performance, responded in rehearsed cadence, almost missing the pulse of the moment. Pacino exhaled deeply afterward, shaking his head. "We're both in the same movie," he said softly, "but I'm not sure we're in the same scene." It wasn't cruelty, it was truth. Pacino had always believed that acting, at its best, is a form of empathy, an unguarded exchange between souls. But when an actor becomes trapped inside technique or method, that exchange dies. It becomes mimicry, not connection. What made House of Gucci so symbolic was that it wasn't just another film for Pacino, it was a mirror. Around him stood a generation of actors raised on immersion and control, each trying to out-transform the other. Meanwhile, he stood as the last of a dying breed, the believer in impulse, in imperfection, in art that breathes. And yet, despite the creative tension, the result was hauntingly beautiful. Pacino's performance as Aldo Gucci radiated human warmth, flawed, foolish, deeply alive. Leto's exaggerated Paolo, though divisive, added an almost surreal layer to the film. Together, they embodied the eternal war Pacino had been fighting his entire career, between the raw and the refined, the spontaneous and the sculpted. In later interviews, Pacino was careful, diplomatic even. He praised Leto's commitment, calling him a passionate artist. But behind that careful tone lay the echo of a man who had once fought these same artistic battles 1,000 times before. When asked about modern acting, Pacino said something that summed up his life's philosophy. The soul doesn't need a script. It needs a reason. NTHAT's single line could have been the epitaph for his entire artistic journey, because for Pacino, truth was never something you constructed. It was something you surrendered to. He never needed prosthetics, dialect coaches, or method rituals to feel alive on screen. All he needed was the courage to trust what was real in the moment, even if that moment broke him open. The irony was profound. Hollywood had spent decades teaching actors to control emotion, while Pacino had spent his entire life trying to lose control, to let the flood of feeling wash over him without resistance. That's what made his performances unforgettable. You didn't watch Pacino act. You watched him exist. In the twilight of his career, as he watched younger generations idolize method acting, Pacino seemed both proud and melancholy. He admired their dedication but pitied their imprisonment. "It's not about staying in character," he once said. "It's about being brave enough to let the character leave you." In by the end of House of Gucci, Pacino's philosophy had come full circle. He no longer fought to prove his method was right. He simply lived it. He let the world see that real artistry doesn't hide behind artifice. It breathes through vulnerability. And in that vulnerability, he remained untouchable. For half a century, Al Pacino had waged a quiet war, not against his peers, but against falseness itself. His clashes with Depp, DiCaprio, Cruise, Spacey, Hoffman, and Leto weren't conflicts of ego. They were symptoms of a deeper struggle between two schools of belief: the performers who build reality, and the rare few, like Pacino, who become it. And as the lights dimmed on House of Gucci, one truth became undeniable. In a world of actors trying to design perfection, Al Pacino still stood alone, the last warrior of emotional chaos. He didn't need to construct authenticity. He was authenticity. Because for Al Pacino, acting was never an art of performance. It was an act of faith. The faith that somewhere between instinct and madness lies the only thing worth living for: the truth.